Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with another exciting collab video. I will of course link the playlist down below as well as the other co-hosts. Yeah, we're here again to complain about the Goodreads Choice Awards. This round is going to be a little different for me and for a couple other participants because Goodreads cut some categories this year. One of those was the entire middle grade and children's section. Yeah, like they've always just thrown all the genres in middle grade together, which is irritating enough. And then they combined middle grade and picture books, which also annoying because those are very different things and they both deserve attention. And now they just cut it all together. And I am furious about it. So I am channeling that energy into something hopefully productive. And I'm gonna basically make my own list. So this is approximately the same length as a Goodreads long list would be. Like I think I ended up doing 18 to 20 books because I had to read a couple in preparation for one of them. I'll get into kind of how I chose the books, and I also want to mention that I was planning to read The Probability of Everything by Sarah Everett and Gone Wolf by Amber McBride, but I wasn't able to get to them. I just didn't have time. Things have gone very haywire for me lately, and yeah, so I just didn't end up having time for those, but I do hope to read those in the future. So in the description you will find, again, the playlist for this set of videos, also our previous playlists of collabs that we did, the co-hosts of course, and I'm also going to put timestamps in case you want to skip around, and also I'm going to put content warnings for the books that I review here. Some of them have quite a lot of them, so just know about those. Okay, so getting into my methodology for like basically cobbling together my own long list. It took a lot more time than I thought it would. First off, I tried to find as many Goodreads lists as I could that were something like 2023 middle grade releases, and then I took any books on that list that had more than 2,000 ratings, which I know is different from being shelved, but I wanted to choose ratings to focus on, so that was a kind of group of books that I took. And then I also looked up some specific authors who I know just from reading a lot of Kidlit, I know that they tend to be nominated for things like this. I looked to see if they had a book that came out in 2023, and if they did, then I included that one. Like Brian Selznick had a new book, Lois Lowry had a book, so that's one of the other things that I added. And then I had to go hunting for any kind of best of 2023 middle grade lists, like just kind of on the wider internet. It took ages and I found almost nothing until I finally found Barnes & Noble had done like a special page that was the Publishers Weekly's best middle grade books of 2023 list. So I pulled most of the books from that list regardless of the number of ratings, and then I did the same with the Barnes & Noble best books of 2023 lists, where they had like a ton of different interesting categories and they would have like 3 books in each. They had a couple of middle grade picks from that one. I also should mention that when I'm choosing books for this list, I did not include graphic novels because those are different, and I also didn't include middle grade nonfiction, so these are all fiction books. And then finally, for the last few spots, I added a few that I was pretty sure, like pretty positive, that they would have been on the Goodreads list, like Nic Blake and the Remarkables by Angie Thomas, or Finally Seen by Kelly Yang. I think I might have also gotten a couple books from the like most popular, like most read on Goodreads this week or something like that. I think I also went back and included a few books that didn't have 2,000 ratings, but they did have more than 1,000. And then finally, I also ended up cutting the 2 Rick Riordan books because I realized as I was planning my book list, I was like, oh, he specifically asked not to be included on the Goodreads list anymore because he wins literally every year he's eligible. And so in keeping with that, I did not include his books on this list either. So that's kind of the rundown on how I chose these. Obviously, it's an imperfect system, and it was hard to even be consistent with some of it because, again, it's just much harder to find the kinds of data that you will often see for other books, other kinds of literature. It's harder to find that for middle grade books, unfortunately. But I did my best, and on the bright side, I know that I probably still put more time into this than Goodreads did, even in years where they actually included the category. So that's kind of how I chose these. And then I want to talk very briefly about like why this matters. Why is it a big deal that Goodreads cut the middle grade category? Because I think it is, and I think there's a few reasons for that. And I'm not going to do, this isn't going to be like a whole discussion video about that, although I absolutely could do one. I just want to touch on some of the kind of biggest problems with this fact, the fact that they have cut this for the year, and you know, I'm hoping they bring back the category in future years, but I just don't know. So for one thing, like, we all hate the Goodreads Choice Awards. We all love to complain about them, but I think that it is similar to the New York Times bestseller list, where even though we know that it is kind of a scam. Like, it's very easy to game the system. The system is not even consistent. It's a semi-curated list, which is basically useless because it's not even a true measure of what the most popular books are, but it's also not a curated selection of like truly great books, you know? So I feel like the Goodreads Choice Awards is very similar, but also like the New York Times list, even though there are so many issues with it, it does still matter. Like, there is still some prestige attached to it. There is still some excitement. It is a big deal for especially a debut author or a marginalized author to win a Goodreads Choice Award, or to even be like a longlist or like a finalist or something. And so not having that visibility for Kidlit is really, really upsetting. And it's gonna hurt a lot of authors. You know, Barnes & Noble has their new hardcover policy for middle grade books, which already is so hard on middle grade authors. And having this on top of that, I just think is really messed up, and it really, really upsets me, and it's frustrating. Also, middle grade books are already more looked down on than most other kinds of literature. And I feel like losing this kind of award is, you know, it doesn't help that. And also, as I found when I was like putting this list together, there's really not a lot of comparable, like, wide reach sort of like awards or like categories that include middle grade books, or that are specifically have a section for middle grade books. I don't mean that there aren't a lot of like prominent middle grade awards, because there absolutely are, but I'm talking about like specifically middle grade awards, or awards that include a middle grade section that are widely known by like the reading public, or just like people in general. Like, the Goodreads Choice Awards is kind of one of the only ones that does that, and we don't have that anymore. Like, it just doesn't have the visibility or the respect that other kinds of books do, and I have been really mad about that for a really long time. And then also, the last thing I wanted to mention, and I actually had not thought of this until a couple of other people mentioned this, and I think it is a very good point. It is especially concerning and upsetting that Goodreads chose to do this in a year where there has been so much censorship and so many book bans, book challenges for things that are just absolutely ridiculous, you know, and just this drive to homogenize the things that kids are allowed to read and experience is incredibly harmful. And I feel like Goodreads just getting rid of its award, like, I'm not saying that's why it happened. You know, some people have suggested that they maybe didn't want to get in trouble, they didn't want to get any backlash by, you know, what if they included some books that had been challenged or something like that. I don't know what the reasoning is. I don't know if they even considered how it would look, like the optics of cutting this category in a time where teachers and librarians are more under attack than ever. So anyway, that's kind of my long story short version of why I do really think it is a big deal that Goodreads cut this award. I'm really, really hoping that they bring it back and that this is a one-off thing, but regardless, I think it is not okay. I think it's a big problem. I think it's also just a really poor financial decision. Like, why? I mean, it can't cost them very much money to like put together these awards, because they don't put that much effort into it. Like, it only brings more attention to their platform. So like, what are they losing by keeping categories? It doesn't make sense. So now on to the books. The Lost Library by Rebecca Steed, illustrated by Wendy Mass. Maybe she's like a co-author or something. So this is a very short little book, and it is about, as you can tell, the Lost Library. It's about a library in a very small town that it burns down, and it's never rebuilt. But then finally, one day, somebody in the town decides that they're going to do their part to bring books and a library back to the town, and so they create a little free library, basically. And we follow a lot of different points of view. We follow some of the people who used to work at the library. We follow Mortimer, who is this cat on the cover here, who's a total sweetheart. We follow, I think Ethan is his name, or Evan, yeah, who is one of the kids in this town, and he is one of the first to discover this library, and he starts trying to solve the mystery of like what actually happened to the library and why it was never rebuilt, like how it burned down. So there is a little bit of a mystery element here as well, and I just thought this was so lovely. I love what it says about libraries and stories. I loved these characters so much. This is one of those books I describe as like just very good, decent people, and just doing their best to take care of each other, and to make the world a little better. And I feel like this is a great example of how you can have characters like that are still interesting and that still has a lot of conflict. I really loved all of the points of view, and maybe Evan might be my favorite. Like, I just really loved him. He was so relatable and so kind and funny. I also loved his best friend. We don't actually get point of view chapters from him, but he was great. And one of the things that I loved about this book is just like the little touches or the little details that make this story like even more like warm and lovely. Like, for example, Evan thinks about how one of the things that makes his best friend so brave is that he's not afraid to ask for a hug when he needs one. And I just love that. I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I liked the writing. I liked the construction of this book. I personally feel like the short chapters and the like many different points of view, I think that really worked and contributed to the story. I thought the themes were really well done. I liked the way the story came together. So yeah, I thought this was great. I gave The Lost Library 5 stars. The Skull by John Klassen. I think he's the author and the illustrator, and this is definitely going to be the book I have the least to say about, just because it is essentially a much longer picture book, and I obviously don't want to give too much away, but it's about a little girl who is, I think she's like walking through the woods looking for shelter or something, and she finds this like old castle, and she finds a skull there, and sort of becomes friends with it. Yeah, this was just really interesting. I thought the art and the atmosphere and everything was done really well. There is a little bit of spookiness, but not very much, and also not really what you might expect. And I thought it was a really interesting take on this kind of story, and it was also very cool reading the author's note, where he talked about where he got the idea from. I thought that was very cool. So yeah, I gave the Skull 4 stars. The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels by Beth Lincoln with illustrations by Claire Powell. Let's see if I can show some illustrations. Like, the full page illustrations were fun, but what I actually thought was even cooler was the designs for the chapter headers. I thought that was super cool. So this is a middle grade mystery. We're following our main character, Shenanigan, because her family has this like weird old tradition of choosing names, like very distinctive names from the dictionary. And they believe that that basically tells you everything that you need to know about somebody's like personality, like in their character and who they are. So Shenanigan is viewed as like a rambunctious troublemaker, always getting into scrapes, always getting into trouble, and she kind of is, but Shenanigan also is like kind of starting to think like, well, maybe I want to be my own person. She starts becoming bothered by the idea that who she is just because of her name. But in terms of like the main plot of this book, it is a mystery where her family is all getting together for this kind of scavenger hunt family reunion. Basically there is a treasure that is supposed to be buried or hidden somewhere in their house, and so the family is all called together. It's kind of this tradition where everybody is like looking for it, and it's usually more of an excuse for everyone just to meet up and to get to see each other. But they do always do the treasure hunt as well. That's an important part of the tradition, and Shenanigan is determined to be the one to find it. But things get derailed when there are some attacks. Like, people are getting hurt, there's some murder or attempted murder, and it quickly becomes a much higher stakes situation than Shenanigan thought. So with her sisters and with some of the other family members or friends of hers, Shenanigan is trying to solve this mystery, possibly try and still get the treasure, and also kind of while she's doing this, she's really grappling with like her identity and how that connects to her name. So actually that identity element, like the themes and the discussion of like names and like the meaning of names and like the power of words, and also the power of your beliefs about somebody or your impression of them, I thought all of that was fantastic. As far as the mystery parts, I think some of it was very interesting, but like the thing that kind of kept me from being fully engaged is that I just found Shenanigan a frustrating character to follow as a protagonist. She felt very, I'm like, okay, so the way I was describing her, you know, like rambunctious, getting into trouble, and she's so precocious, and like all these things that are supposed to be really charming, but actually to me sound like they would be absolutely insufferable. She's kind of like that. I didn't like hate her or anything. I did like some elements of her character. I liked some scenes with her, but the other thing that I found very frustrating is the way that she treated her older sister, who is the, like, very girly one. She's into, like, clothing design and everything, and of course Shenanigan gets along much better with her science sister, not, like, the girly one. And just, like, the things that Shenanigan does, like, it was very, very Little Women, where Amy burns the manuscript. Like, just the like, disproportionate retribution was, like, very difficult for me to take. And we do see that relationship improve. I actually really liked the way that Shenanigan kind of grew to rely more on her sisters, specifically her older sister, who she's not used to being friendly with. So I do think that improved as the book went, but there was still a big chunk of it where it was just honestly very, like, frustrating or irritating to see Shenanigan just continually, like, not think anything of her sister. But I do think that that was partly intentional, or maybe even fully intentional, because not only do we see their relationship develop, but the way that her sister Felicity, like, the way that the way that she's treated because of her name, I think is super interesting and, again, intentional. So I liked where the story went with that, but I just think that we needed, for me at least, I would have liked more time spent on that and less time of the, like, annoying stuff at the beginning. I also think that the writing was quirky in a way that for the most part I enjoyed. Sometimes it was over the top, but mostly I liked it. And I also liked the way that everything kind of pulled together at the end. At the end of the story, and I also really liked some of the other kind of family relationships. So, like, kind of a mixed bag. I didn't love this like I think a lot of people are, but it was fine. I gave the Swifts 3.5 stars. I listened to an audio that was The One and Only Ruby by Catherine Applegate. The narrator is Amani Parks, who was wonderful. I really enjoyed that. And this is a super, super short book. The audiobook is only like 3 hours, but I think it was really, really effective. So this is in the One and Only Ivan series. I think it's kind of funny that I ended up reading this one for this project because the previous, like, the actual Goodreads Choice Awards video that I did, I had to read the second one, despite not reading the first one. And you can do that. Like, you know, you were technically spoiled for some things that happened in the first book, but, like, they follow different main characters and everything. So we are following Ruby as our main character here. She is a baby elephant that we know from other books, and I just really, really enjoyed this. Like, I think it was very effective. It's a lot about family, about Ruby's new family that she has, and we find out more about her previous, like, life situation, because she actually was not born in captivity. She was born in Africa, and of course the reasons that she ended up in a like a nature reserve or anything or something like that obviously are not very happy. Animals don't tend to end up in those places for good reasons, but I think it was dealt with a very light touch and appropriately for the audience. Yeah, I thought the things that this said about family were beautiful. I really, really liked the relationships between Ruby and some of the other characters. There's one of her aunts in particular who I really loved, and I loved the role that she played in the story and in Ruby's life. I think that this book is also really great for kids because it shows, it kind of introduces them to the topics of, you know, like poaching or hunting and, like, treating animals well. And also, I think that this is one of the best books that I have read to deal with the messiness of zoos versus animals living in the wild. It doesn't, like, come right out and sort of, like, you know, announce itself one way or the other. The book definitely isn't overly preachy, and it also, like, I wouldn't even say that that is a primary focus of the book, but I just really liked that the book's perspective, it seems to be like, yes, there are a lot of problems with some zoos. There are definitely problems with circuses. This book is very anti-circus, which I am as well. But I feel like sometimes the issue of zoos and animals in captivity, it feels like it can be oversimplified. And not just for kids, I just mean, like, in general. And I feel like this book does a good job of showing, like, yes, in a perfect world, animals would be able to live in the wild. But humans being what they are, we're not there yet, and the best that we can do right now is to give them enough space and to give them the care that they need and habitats that mimic the ones they would have in the wild. Like, I don't feel like I'm explaining this very well, but I feel like that aspect especially stood out to me as being just very nuanced and very well done. And also one thing I loved about this book is I feel like this was the perfect amount or kind of like animal characterization, because especially for elephants who are so intelligent, and I feel like every time scientists learn more about them, it just like it just reinforces how incredibly smart they are and how much emotion they have. And that's something, you know, people can be very critical of, like humans' tendency to anthropomorphize animals, but I feel like elephants in particular is one of the examples of, like, we have so much data about their grieving practices. Like, that's just sort of one example of how intelligent they are. And I feel like this book did a really excellent job of not writing Ruby and the other elephants as just humans, you know, but also really showing and demonstrating the depth of intelligence and emotion and care that these animals have, that they do have in real life. I thought this was excellent. I gave The One and Only Ruby 5 stars. Iceberg by Jennifer A. Nielsen. This is yet another book on this list that is like a very specific thing that I do not, I don't seek out. I don't enjoy reading about it. I'm not a big fan of Titanic stories. Like, I do think it is very interesting and we have a lot to learn from it, but it's not something that I enjoy, you know? But here I am. I had to read one. So I ended up listening to this on audio. I will put the narrator in captions because I thought she did a really fantastic job. I mean, the number of accents alone that she did so well, I just think is very impressive. But also I think she performed the story very well. So we are following our main character, Hazel Rothbury, who is, I think she's like 12 or 13. And her mom is sending her away from, I think, do they live in Ireland maybe? Or maybe they live in England, but like her family is Irish. So she's sending Hazel away to stay with their aunt in New York City, to live there now so that she can get a job in a garment factory and make money to send home to her family, because they really need it. And, you know, Hazel has dreams of other things she wants to do, but she also really wants to take care of her family. So she goes along with it, she agrees, and the ship that she is on is, of course, the Titanic. And, you know, we all know how that ends. So, like, the sinking of the Titanic is, of course, a part of the story, but a lot of the book is actually about Hazel as a character and like some of the other passengers she meets, also Hazel's dream of becoming a reporter, and also I thought that was kind of a clever way to talk about a lot of the interesting technical things about ships and about the Titanic. Interesting, but also obviously very sad and horrifying because we know how things end. But it was very interesting to learn about that, and having Hazel be such a curious character who also wanted to publish a story. Like, I think that was a good way to include that. So I thought the information aspect was really like engaging and really interesting, and she obviously did a lot of research, and I also really like that in her author's note she specifically lays out the characters that she like fictionalizes versus the people who really were on the ship, or you know, the information that she included and how accurate that was, because again, she did include a lot of the real like science and facts, and I also like that she specifically says that there's a couple of like officers, for example, that have a fairly big supporting role in the story, and she invented them because she didn't want to take a real person who had been on the Titanic and like rewrite their personality and like who they were. So I admire that. I think that's a really good way to do it. So there were things that I liked about this, or that I thought were well done, but most of the actual storytelling wasn't my favorite. Like, I liked Hazel as a character, you know, she's plucky and smart and interesting, and I think that the audiobook narrator helped contribute to that, but I really didn't end up liking her main plotline. Like, the reporting thing was fine, but like the other stuff that Hazel gets pulled into with some of the other passengers, and like a plan somebody has to steal something and all of that, I just really didn't care much about that, and that was kind of a big chunk of the book. And then also the way that like there were some of the like moments or some of the side characters that like I did like, but the way that they were introduced into the story and the way that they were made a part of the story just felt very clunky and very distracting. So like plot and characterization, which are, you know, two pretty big elements of a book, just weren't really there for me. But like, did I cry at the end? Yes, obviously. Like, some of those last few chapters really got to me. So yeah, like the emotional impact was obviously still present for the story, but I think that there were some elements of the character and the plot that could have made this a much more effective story. And then another thing I thought was weird is that like there's a very short kind of like note from the author where she talks about like her intention or her message with the story, and I really like that message, but I did not get that from the book at all. Like, I really would have liked that to be a bigger part of the book, because like I read that was what we were supposed to take away from the story, and I was kind of shocked. Like, I really didn't see that present there. And then also there were just some frustrating things about Hazel as a protagonist. Like, I mentioned that I found her likable for the most part, which is true, but some of the choices that she makes, like, it just, especially near the end of the book, I don't begrudge her for obviously like wanting to help people. I think that is incredibly brave. But her decision-making process around that, like, obviously, you know, especially when people are panicking, they make decisions that don't always make sense. But like, the thing that was very frustrating is that I feel like there wasn't an acknowledgement that, like, yes, Hazel was trying to help people, but the way that she was doing it could actually put more people in danger. And that was something that I found just pretty frustrating. And also, like, some of the back and forth I thought was, again, frustrating. Like, separately from the knowledge that, like, yes, of course, people will often make bad choices or inconsistent choices, especially in situations like this. Separate from all of those considerations, like, reading and following Hazel as she was doing these things was part of the, like, reading experience that for me was frustrating, and that contributed to me not clicking with the book completely. So I think I ended up at like a 3 or 3.5 stars for this one. The Night Raven. This is the first book in the Moonwind Mysteries series by Johan Rundberg, translated by A.A. Prime. I probably already said this in the intro, but I am so shocked and pleasantly surprised that a translated book was one of the, like, really popular ones that I picked for this project, like, that it had the numbers that I did that for. I just think that's very cool, because I think translated books, especially for like middle grade readers, do not get the attention here in the US that they deserve. Yeah, and this is the first in a series. A.A. Prime is also a translator that I have really enjoyed before, so that was cool. And we are following our main character, Mika, who is an orphan. She's at like an orphanage or kind of a care home for children, and this is in, yes, it's set in Stockholm in 1880. And I only just realized on the back of the book that Mika is apparently 12. And what kind of kicks off the whole story is that Mika is there when a newborn baby is left at the orphanage, and some sort of like weird connections or circumstances around that end up pulling her into a series of murders that are happening in the city. She ends up actually working with one of these like police officers who seems to be taking her thoughts and her observations more seriously than adults tend to do. And I feel like Mika was written so well and so interestingly that it felt believable that she would be that she would become part of this investigation, especially because the like inspector or the officer character, I think he was also very well written. So like, I don't know, their friendship was kind of lovely, and just like the respect that they had for each other, especially that he had for Mika, who again, as a very poor orphan, is not used to getting that respect from anybody really, or from many people. And I loved this so much. I thought Mika as a main character was fantastic. Like, I just love her intelligence and her bravery and her compassion and her humor, like the way that she really takes it upon herself to care for the younger kids at this orphanage, but she does it in her own way. As I said, I loved the kind of central like friendship or like mentor relationship that she develops with this inspector. I actually thought the mystery was incredibly well done and very compelling. I think like, especially when you're an adult reading middle grade mysteries, like I don't necessarily think it's fair to judge the quality of a mystery on how like surprising it was for you as an adult reader. But in this case, this is one of the ones where there were parts that I figured out or anticipated, but there were also connections between things that I did not see coming, and I thought those were done really, really well. And I think that even if you did figure out everything that happened beforehand, I feel like the mystery would still be interesting because the way it's put together is so smart, and I just loved the central characters who were involved in the mystery. Like, I really liked Mika. I ended up really liking Detective Hoff, like, more than I expected I would. I also feel like the wintry atmosphere in the setting was done very well, was communicated very effectively, and I feel like the kind of heart of this book was very prominent, like this underlying kind of compassion that like Mika and just like the story as a whole has for the people who are doing their best and who are still struggling, and it's not their fault. So I thought that was done very well. Like just the themes in general I really liked in this book, and I liked the way that those connected to the mystery. That's something that I tend to enjoy, is when like there's a mystery but also it's like saying something, like the book is saying something with the mystery. And I also really liked the writing and translation. Yeah, so I thought this was great. I really am excited that this is the first book in a series because I obviously loved this. I give The Night Raven 5 stars, and again, I'm just very happy that it apparently is getting so much attention. Yeah, I love that. Big Tree by Brian Selznick, and this is actually another very well-loved children's author that I had never read. Brian Selznick is well known for his books that are like half and half illustrations and text, and for some reason when I had always heard that, I assumed it was like you read half the book that's text and then you read half the book that's pictures or something, but it's actually like interspersed throughout, which I think works a lot better. And so this one is about a couple of sycamore seeds who are personified and characterized. They're our main characters, and there is Louise and I think Merwin, something like that, who is her brother, and it's about them kind of being sent off into the world to try and find a safe place to grow. And this is another one that I think is a very interesting concept for a story. First off, the illustrations were beautiful. Like, I am so just blown away by the amount of emotion and detail that Brian Selznick conveys in black and white drawings. I just think that's very cool. And I think that the blending of the art and the text was very, very well done, which makes sense. Like, this is kind of what he's known for, like his specialty. And I think the message of the story is very important and very necessary. And I admire that he like turned that necessity into this story. And I also feel like there were some elements of the ending that I really appreciated, that I really loved, and I think it kind of came together well for me at the end. But unfortunately, this is another one where, in terms of the story itself and the characterization, I didn't like it as much. I just wasn't very invested in the characters or the story. I found Louise to be, I don't know, kind of frustrating. I mean, Melwyn definitely was as well. But I feel like the reason that Louise stood out to me more as being a frustrating character is that the book was very aware that Merwin/Melwyn was sometimes irritating and very frustrating. So like, I think that was validating. Whereas with Louise, I don't think we were supposed to find her frustrating. Yeah, but like there were some really great thematic moments. I think that the choice of setting here is fascinating. And I really liked it. And again, like, I think that this book is very important for what it does. I just feel like, you know, I think that having a really necessary message and story, it doesn't mean that the actual storytelling aspects have to be weaker. You know what I mean? Like, being an important story doesn't mean that something can't also be enjoyable or entertaining or interesting or well written. And it's not that I didn't think this book was those things at all. I just think that it could have been more of those things. I feel like that was a very roundabout way of describing that, but I gave Big Tree 3.75 stars. I am glad I read a Brian Selznick book now. Remember Us by Jacqueline Woodson. This is very, very short, and this is I feel like it's kind of in that middle space between contemporary and historical fiction. I guess judging by the author's note, this would count as historical fiction, but it feels very like of the moment as well, of its time, but also like of any time. We're following our main character Sage, who lives in Brooklyn, and her neighborhood is known as the Matchbox because of how many fires there are. It's a very crowded area, and all the houses are made out of wood, and the houses are so close together that like if one fire starts, it can end up bringing down a lot of buildings. And of course that's like people's livelihoods, sometimes their lives, so it's very dangerous. But Sage also loves her community. She loves where she lives. She loves like the feeling of home that she has there, and she also loves basketball. She's a really, really amazing basketball player, even though she gets a hard time because she's a girl, and at this time there was no WNBA. And so this book is just really slice of life in a lot of ways. It's about just Sage's everyday life. It's about her friendships, especially with this boy named Freddie, who moves to the neighborhood at the beginning of the book, and I loved the friendship between them. I just love the friendships in general because there's a few others that we see later on, and Jacqueline Woodson is just so good at character work that like even the characters that you only meet for a few chapters, these are very, very short chapters as well, like they still feel so rich and full, and I adore her writing style. There is this beautiful clarity to it. I feel like Jacqueline Woodson is one of those authors who just beautifully captures emotion and like feelings and images, but without using a lot of overwrought language. Like, I think I've described her language before as being deceptively simple. Not simple in a bad way, but like it's there's like that clarity again, you know. It reminds me of how people talk about poetry being the most pared down form of writing, and I feel like that's what Jacqueline Woodson's writing is like, whether she's writing poetry or prose. Yeah, I really thought Sage was beautifully developed. This book does get very heavy. This is a good time to mention again that I'm going to put content warnings for all the books in the description because this one has quite a few. But yeah, I just thought this was really, really well done. I'm at like a 4.5 stars, but like the last few chapters, there's like some things in the last few chapters that might bump this up for me. And I also feel like this book did a really good job of exploring Sage as a character who is a girl who doesn't feel like she fits in with other girls, but as the book goes, she ends up learning more about the many ways there are to be a girl and that she's not alone. So I feel like that kept the book from falling into the not like other girls trap that often frustrates me. Yeah, so I thought this was very, very good. It's not like my absolute favorite Jacqueline Woodson book. I've only read a few by her, but I've loved all of them. But like, it's still fantastic, you know? The Other Woods by Justine Pucella-Winans. This is a spooky middle grade, as you can probably tell from the cover. We're following our main character, who is a non-binary kid named River, and they have always had the ability, the curse, to see monsters and to see ghosts, and their whole life they've had these like scary portals appear to them, and these portals go to a place called the Other Woods, and River has been avoiding them their whole life, but then their friend Avery gets kidnapped and brought into the Other Woods, and River is really afraid. They don't think of themselves as being a hero, but they know that they have to go after her, and so they do. They bring their kitty Pancakes along with them. I thought this was great. I really, really love River so much. I felt for them so much, and I just really admire the way that even though they're so afraid of these genuinely very terrifying things, they keep pushing themselves anyway. Like, I know it's a cliche to talk about how, like, bravery is not when you aren't afraid, it's when you do things anyway. But, like, I really feel like this book demonstrates that beautifully. And I really liked Avery as well. I liked their friendship. I loved Pancakes. Just A+ cat companion. And I really like the way that the author like used this like ability that River has and connects it to being queer, being non-binary in a way that is subtle. And I think that the creepiness of the setting and of the story was done very well. Like I said, I enjoyed the themes about bravery and also about how loving somebody doesn't mean that you always say the right thing or that you always completely understand them. Like, you can love and support somebody even if you don't really get what their experience is like, or even if you have a different experience. So I thought that was great as well. And yeah, I thought this was very well done. I gave The Other Woods 4 stars. I'm going to be talking about the first 2 Wild Robot books because the third one is the one that's on the list. This is a very well-loved series, and I'm excited I finally had a specific reason to start. I've been meaning to get to it for a while. So the first book is The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. He's also the illustrator. And I really enjoyed the illustration styles, or style. So this, like, we follow kind of like multiple points of view, although like the central character is of course the robot named Roz, who washes up on an island after the cargo ship that was carrying her and a bunch of other robots is destroyed, and she's the only one who survives. And she gets kind of accidentally activated, and so she wakes up on this island that has no humans on it, just a lot of animals, and it's about her kind of like trying to make friends with the animals, trying to get them to trust her. It's about just like her living in the wild, you know, becoming the wild robot. And there's some really, really lovely like family, like found family relationships here as well. I really, really loved this. This was just such a warm and tender story. It didn't feel like overly sweet or saccharine. I know sometimes that can be something that is a concern for some people with middle grade, and I didn't find this that way at all. Like, there's plenty of middle grade that isn't like that, and this is one of those. I really loved the characterization. I liked the writing style itself. As I said, the relationships were wonderful, and I just like, I was so invested in these characters, in Roz and Brightbill, and in all of their animal friends. Like, Chit Chat the squirrel, I adore. I was like, if anything happens to her, I will be so upset. yeah, there were some great moments of humor here, and I think that this had some really lovely things to say about, again, like connection and family and love and like what makes a family. It was just really wonderful without being heavy-handed. And I also think that this book, I feel like it's a good balance for young readers of like the hope and the happiness while also like talking about the real like dangers in the wild. It felt appropriate to me, and I also feel like I know that people have used this as like a read aloud to like kids in their life, and I feel like this would definitely work for that very well. Like I think it really lends itself to that. But yeah, 5 stars. I thought this was fantastic. And then the second book is The Wild Robot Escapes, also by Peter Brown, of course, and again, some great illustrations here. I don't want to get into too many specifics, obviously, about the plot of this one, but you can kind of tell from the title that Roz is trying to get back home. I still enjoyed this one, but not quite as much as the first book. I think because we didn't spend a lot of time with some of the side characters I really loved, and we did meet some other side characters who I enjoyed or I thought were interesting, but I don't feel like there was as much like characterization for them as from the first book, but I still love Roz. I still think the themes of this series are really well done and really interesting, and it reads very quickly, so that even the parts of the plot that I am less into or less invested in, I still found the book engaging overall. So I think I'm at like a 4.5 stars for this one. Like I said, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first book, but it's still very good, and I'm very glad to be finally reading this series. The Wild Robot Protects by Peter Brown. This is the third and I think final book in the Wild Robot series, which I read the first 2 so that I could get to this third one, which is the one that was on my list. And yeah, I once again really enjoyed this. I think that my favorite is still the first book, but I did really love this one. I enjoyed it more than the second book. I think the themes were great. We are following Roz once again. And in this book, compared to the second book, we do spend more time with some of the other characters that we already know, so that was cool. And I just really love the emphasis on like environmentalism and like the interconnectedness of life. And I thought that with that, this was also a very engaging story. I don't know where in the video this clip's going to end up, so I don't know if you've already seen the review, but there's another one that I'm going to talk about in this vlog, or that I have talked about, where similarly I really admire the message. I think it's incredibly important and necessary, but I don't feel like the storytelling execution I don't think was as good, whereas with the Wild Robot series, in this book specifically, I think that it is important, and also I thought the characterization and everything was great. So yeah, 5 stars for this one. What Happened to Rachel Riley by Claire Swinarski. This is I feel like you could almost call this a contemporary mystery, because figuring out what happened is a big part of this book. So we are following our main character Anna, and she is the new girl at her middle school. Her family has just moved to a new town, and she gets given a class assignment to do something called an un-essay, and the students are really encouraged to get creative with it and to like ask interesting questions and to have like to do it about like a social issue that they're passionate about, because this is for their social causes class. And Anna doesn't necessarily plan on making this her project at first, but the thing that she can't let go of is this other girl in class or in their school named Rachel Riley. Like, she's a social pariah at their school, even though from everything Anna has seen, that's not how it used to be. Like, there's no apparent reason for why all the kids ignore her, why they treat her this way. And Anna is really upset by this, obviously, and she also becomes determined to find out what actually happened, because nobody wants to talk about what happened to Rachel Riley. And so even though her teacher is like, yeah, ethically we can't let you do a project on like another student, Anna kind of keeps pursuing it on her own as more of just something that she cares about, because she's interacted with Rachel and she seems really nice, and she doesn't understand why everybody in the school, everyone in the town, treats her the way they do. And so the book is about kind of her piecing that together, and this is so good. First off, the kind of mystery element I found incredibly compelling and gripping and very thoughtful. Like, the way that the unfolding story is done with so much purpose, like the themes that the author is tackling, I think all of that is done so well. And even if you start kind of getting inklings about what's going on, I think that the way everything is written is still very engaging. I also love Anna as a main character. She's just so smart and so passionate about things, and she cares maybe a little too much, or at least other people think it's too much, but I love her for it. I thought some of the complicated like friendships, or like used to be friendships, were done very well. I absolutely loved Anna's family and like their relationships with each other. It's just really nice to see her have such a positive relationship with her family. Like, obviously they have disagreements, but it's a family where they really support each other and care about each other. And I also had no idea when I started this that this book is actually mixed media, because it's sort of in the format of this un-essay that Anna would want to turn in. And I thought that was so well done. Like, the writing style itself is just, I think, really, really good. And also something I think is interesting is that even though Anna does kind of slip a little bit into the not like other girls thing, for one thing, that is a phase that unfortunately a lot of us had in middle school. I definitely did. But also I think that in the context of the story, I think that is maybe more about the way that society views girls rather than like the book trying to convince us that other girls are not good. You know what I mean? So I thought this was fantastic. I feel like this is one of those books where even if you don't read a lot of middle grade contemporaries, I think this one is really one that a lot of people should check out. I thought this was fantastic. I gave What Happened to Rachel Riley 5 stars. The Windeby Puzzle by Lois Lowry. This is a really, really interesting structure for a book. So it is based on the Windeby Child, which is one of the bog bodies that was found. I think this one was found in like the 50s, and it's from like a few thousand years ago, and there's a lot of these bog bodies that historians and anthropologists have to study because bogs really preserve bodies better than a lot of other things, and so you can actually get a lot of information from those bodies. And so Lois Lowry has taken the Windeby Child, which is one of those, and sort of imagined a historical fiction story around that, but there's like a few different sections in the book. So some of it deals with the finding of the body, some of it deals with one version of the story, and then another section is like after developments in technology. We know more, we know different things about the Windeby Child, and so then there's another section that is sort of an alternate historical fiction, so like taking that information and saying, well, what if this happened instead? And this is actually the first thing I've read by Lois Lowry. I do intend to read her Giver series, but I just haven't gotten around to it, so it was interesting reading something by her for the first time, and I think this is a really interesting idea, but I didn't really get along with it as a story. As far as things that I did enjoy, I really liked the structure, actually. I could see that being jarring for people, but I really liked it. It is sort of in a similar vein to Amber and Clay by Laura Amy Schlitz, which is a book I love, but it has that kind of same historical fiction being built around archaeology in a way that I thought was very interesting, and I liked that structure of the book. I also feel like one of the strengths of this story for me is the way that Lois Lowry really like humanized people in the far past, like in these like ancient Celtic societies, because I think there's a tendency for modern readers, like I think we all probably do this at some point, and we need to kind of train ourselves not to, but there's a tendency to think of older societies as being less, I don't want to say less important, because that's not specific enough, but almost like less interesting, less human, less beautiful in a way. Like, I just really like the way that Lois Lowry's storytelling around these fictional characters that were inspired by these real like sources or findings. I like the way that she really pulled out the ideas that people have always been people, you know, and that sounds of course very generic or repetitive. I don't think I'm explaining it very well, but basically like the idea of human dignity and like human life having meaning, just life having meaning in general, like that has been true always, you know, even if like technology was not as advanced, or even if society was different. So that was one of the things that I think this story did do well. But unfortunately, I didn't really like it otherwise. I didn't really like the characterization choices that Lois Lowry made. The first half, like the first kind of version of the story, we are following a young girl as the main character, and it was very, very vague, generic feminism. it just really, it didn't feel like a book that was published this year, if that makes sense. And not that there's anything wrong with stories about girls wanting to be warriors, but the way it was done felt completely flat and just not interesting at all. Like, I think in contrast to the kind of humanizing of these characters in general, of the story in general, I feel like the development of this young girl, of this main character, of what she wanted, it was extremely flat and just kind of paint by numbers generic feminism. And like, I felt for her as a person and for what she went through, and I think there were some poignant moments, but like as a story or as a character arc, I don't think it was super effective. And then the other kind of version of the story follows a disabled character as the main character, and I had seen reviews for this book talking about how people really didn't like the way the disabled character was used in the story. And after reading the book, I can definitely see why. It wasn't in quite the way that I was worried it was going to be, but it still, I think, wasn't great. And like, I understand what the author was trying to say with this message about doing this great thing and that being like that giving your life worth or meaning, but combining that with a character with a disability just led to some unfortunate implications, I feel like. And I also just struggled to see what the kind of end result of this story was. Like, not exactly what was the intention, because I do feel like Lois Lowry is very clear on her intention, which I appreciate. It's very much about like imagining possibilities for people who might have lived then, and kind of giving the respect and the, again, human dignity to people from a much farther like time and culture. And I think that is very important. But in terms of the novel itself, I just don't feel like it ends with any kind of impact, I guess, except for being just really sad and unpleasant in a lot of ways. Like, I find it very odd that this story of the Windeby child, of this bog body, somebody like looked at that and was like, I'm gonna make this a children's book. Not because kids' books can't deal with difficult topics, obviously they can, and I talk about that all the time, but I think this specific story, I kind of struggle to understand why somebody would make the choices that this author did. So yeah, I think I'm at like a 2.5 stars. I really wasn't a fan of this one, unfortunately. Shira and Esther's Double Dream debut by Anna E. Jordan. I really love this cover. I just think that's so lovely. So this is a sort of vaguely historical fiction, but it's definitely not like too strict about that. We're following Shira and Esther, and they are two young Jewish girls who have big dreams, and their parents are not really thrilled about them. They're not super supportive. Shira's father is a rabbi, and he is really excited for her to have her bat mitzvah, and he has pretty firm ideas about what is appropriate for Shira to do, but she wants to be on the stage. She wants to be a singer and a performer, and that's the thing that really makes her happy, and she's really good at it, and she wants a chance. So she wants to audition for a talent show or a talent competition, and her dad doesn't want her to. And then Esther is, as you can probably predict, kind of the opposite, because her mother is a really famous stage performer, and she really wants Esther to follow in her footsteps, and Esther's not interested. She's really interested in learning more about Judaism. She actually would really love to have a bat mitzvah, but her mother doesn't really encourage that. And when Shira and Esther bump into each other, they come up with the idea to switch places, because, as you can maybe tell by the cover, they resemble each other enough that they think they can probably get away with it, especially because kind of the whole point of the book, or of these characters, is that their parents love them, but they're not listening to them. They're not paying attention to what their kids actually want and what they're actually saying makes them happy. I loved this so much. I feel like the writing style is so like warm and funny and genuine. I love the choice of who the narrator is, and the narration style itself is just wonderful. I really enjoyed Shira and Esther. I loved their determination. I loved the kind of like some of the strengths that they shared, but also how they were very much their own characters. I loved their friendship. I loved some of the other side characters as well here. And I really think this book did a beautiful job of showing how messy like loving family relationships can be, because Shira and Esther's parents are not bad people. It's not that they don't care about their kids, it's just that they have very specific ideas of the things that will be best for them or the things that will make them happy, and they're so fixated on wanting their kids to be happy that they don't pay attention to what they're actually saying or wanting. And I just feel like that was very humanizing, the way that was done. I enjoyed like the story elements. I loved the characters. I also really love how respectful this book is of both of the main characters' like passions or choices. And something else that I thought is really cool is that it really like, I feel like it did a pretty good job of addressing some of the more unlikely parts of the premise. Like, yes, there is still some suspension of disbelief and you kind of just have to accept that, and that doesn't bother me, but I do think it's pretty cool that in this book the author clearly like put some thought into like a little bit of the logistics of how this could work or how this could happen, and it was in a way that really served the themes of the story as well. So I thought this was lovely. I gave Shira and Esther's Double Dream debut 5 stars. Simon Sort of Says by Erin Bow. This is a really heavy topic that this book deals with, and it's one I definitely wouldn't have picked up if not for this project, because this book deals with the aftermath of a school shooting, and that's not something that I seek out content about usually. But we're following our main character Simon, who is famous for being the only survivor of a mass shooting at his elementary school. So obviously massive content warnings for this book. It is about like the aftermath and that trauma, so there's not a lot of details about the massacre itself, but just it is a big part of the book obviously, so just be aware of that. So yeah, Simon and his parents end up moving to this tiny town that is near the satellites that they use for the SETI program, and so for that reason there's like no internet there basically. The author talks about how she fictionalizes certain elements of it, but a lot of it is actually true or based on true science. So Simon and his family think that they're going to be able to get away from this horrible thing, this like horrible twisted kind of fame that they have, and like the way that people just don't leave them alone, and they don't leave Simon alone, and they don't seem to care about what it is like to be known for this and to have all of this grief and suffering all the time, and to have people like shoving microphones in your face about it. So they think this is going to be a fresh start, and Simon just really wants to keep to himself and not get involved, like just fly, you know, under the radar, pun intended. And this is a really well done book. It's obviously very heavy, very hard to read in places, but there's a surprising amount of humor in it as well. I also love Simon as a main character. He's just like funny and good and smart, and I really enjoyed his friendships as well. I love his parents, and I think that they're really interesting characters, and I really loved like the whole family dynamic they have. His mother is a mortician or an undertaker, and his father is a deacon. So in the Catholic Church they're not priests, but they do some of the same kind of things, and that's not like a huge part of the book. But I also really liked how the book really criticizes the idea of, you know, everything happens for a reason, and it was a miracle that Simon was saved, and like the way that, like, I understand why people do it, but like the way that like people will say things like that and not think about the implications of what that means for the people who did not survive. Like that's something I feel strongly about, and so I really like that this book dealt with that as well. This book deals with trauma obviously and grief, but also on finding support and love from people, and yeah, just very heavy, very intense, but incredibly well done story. I cared about these characters so much. Also, something I want to mention is that one of the things that Simon and his friends get involved with is like possibly trying to like fake an alien signal, and they don't start out doing it for like nefarious reasons or anything, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh, that's a little like unethical. I don't know how I feel about it. But then props to the author for totally bringing me around, because of the characterization of one of the people who is like one of the head scientists for the project or something. Anyway, basically I was not sorry at all about it by the end, which I think is good writing as well. So yeah, I gave Simon Sort of Says 5 stars. Greenwild, The World Behind the Door by Perry Thompson. This is the first book in what is going to be a series. I don't know how many. And I have to show off these gorgeous end papers and the absolutely stunning design of the hardcover. I think that is so beautiful. So we are following our main character Daisy, and her and her mom like travel a lot, like basically constantly, because her mom is a journalist, a reporter, and she travels all over the world to tell really important, really necessary stories, sometimes in very extreme or dangerous conditions, but she always brings Daisy with her, obviously like leaving her, you know, somewhere safe while she goes off to do her thing. And Daisy and her mom are incredibly close. And then one day, Daisy's mother tells her that she has to do this one big dangerous assignment, and she can't take Daisy. But she gives her a few instructions on if something happens to her, where Daisy can go for help, and she also gives her this kind of glass like flower and tells her to keep it safe. And so Daisy gets sent to this like boarding school for a couple weeks. It's really miserable, and eventually she decides that she has to leave. She has to get out of there, and she follows her mother's instructions about getting help, and she ends up finding herself in this like magical portal world, and that's where the majority of the story takes place. And so Daisy is, you know, learning more about this world, trying to figure out this whole like magic, like botany magic kind of thing, and trying to get her mother back, or to figure out like what happened to her, because her mom just disappears. She's supposed to come back for Daisy, and she never does, and Daisy thinks that she's still alive, but she is obviously really worried about her, and she's trying to figure out how to get her back. I thought the concept for this was really cool. I think the writing itself is good. The setting is interesting, although I do feel like the setting was so much of a focus in this book that I feel like there wasn't a lot of room for like plot or character development. Like I was pretty bored, honestly, by the story. Like, not that I wasn't invested in Daisy finding her mother, but I feel like there was a lot of just like waiting around time, or time where like we were just kind of sitting there in the setting. And like, I love a good, you know, atmospheric setting, but I don't think that that can only be the thing that's pulling me into a book. So that kind of left me a little underwhelmed. But as I said, I did really enjoy the writing. I also, like, the art is gorgeous. Let me show. Like, just really, really beautiful. I think, is it Elsa Paganelli, I think, is the illustrator? Elisa Paganelli. I did enjoy Daisy as a main character. Like, I really felt for her, and I thought that Daisy was a better developed character than some of the others. But again, I just was kind of underwhelmed by the characters overall. Like, the friendships were fine, but they weren't anything special for me. There was one sort of subplot where Daisy ends up like crossing paths with this person who like shouldn't even be able to be here. I thought that was super interesting. It had a little bit of like Secret Garden vibes, so that was fun. So there were things I enjoyed about it, but like in general, this just felt very slow, pretty uninteresting to me. I don't feel like the characters were super well developed, and yeah, I'm sad because it's a really gorgeous book, and I really obviously wanted to enjoy it, and I don't know, just didn't do a lot for me. I do want to mention that Pari Thompson is half Persian, and Daisy is as well, and so I did like seeing the way that that was brought into the story a little bit. But yeah, like I guess 3 stars, like it was fine. I do think that some of the tone and the setting and like the whimsy and everything, it feels a little bit like the Morgan Crow series, although I personally feel like this one is better done than that one, like in terms of balancing the tone and everything. So I don't know, maybe I'm sure a lot of people are enjoying this one, but it just wasn't my thing. The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett. This is a fairly loose retelling of Anne of Green Gables, but with magic. Our main character is Grace, and she does have magical abilities, and she ends up deliberately going to the house of this witch who lives in the woods to ask her to train her, because she wants to be able to use her magic, and she's never had a home, and so she thinks that even though the witch is very scary and she's heard all these terrible things about her, at least she would be kind of like her. And the witch is not pleased to have Grace asking to be her apprentice, and in fact she almost kills Grace, and then they end up making a bargain where if Grace can work her way through the witch's grimoire, like her book of spells, successfully, then I think by the time the like cherry blossoms bloom or fall or something, then the witch will agree to take Grace as her apprentice, and if not, she gets to take Grace's magic from her. And Grace also slowly starts to make friends with some of the other kids, She's so excited to go to school for the first time, and we gradually see her kind of develop this found family around her. And she also is learning quite a bit about magic as she works her way through these spells. I thought this was really well done. I adore Grace so much. She is very much like Anne, which makes sense because, you know, that's what this book is based on. She's very imaginative, she's romantic, she has this beautiful, compassionate heart, she cares about people, she's a bit of a drama queen. I just really love her, and I feel like this book did a really good job of kind of channeling those aspects of Anne Shirley without making it overly saccharine or overly sweet. And I thought the writing in this book was just absolutely excellent. It's got the perfect amount of whimsicalness or whimsy. It's got humor, it's got heart, it's got these really beautiful, touching moments. I thought the relationships between these characters were fantastic. Like the found family that Grace starts developing, and the friendships, and the, like, I love the Diana Barry character. She is just so plucky and so much fun. I loved this book's version of Gilbert Blythe, although as with the original, I'm like, Anne, why didn't you forgive him sooner? But yeah, so there's a lot that I really loved here. The setting was great. I thought the magic was incredibly interesting, and I was really impressed at how well kind of balanced this book was in terms of the plot. Like, it didn't feel long or repetitive, because we got all of this great character work and like setting and atmosphere and everything mixed in with the spells and everything. The one thing that didn't work for me with this is the witch character herself. So she is like this book's version of the Marilla character. Again, a very loose retelling, so I'm not saying that like that she should have been, you know, almost the same as Marilla, but one of the reasons that I think a lot of people love the Anne of Green Gables story, it's not just for Anne, but it's for Anne's relationships with other people, and it's for those other people themselves in their own right. Like, Marilla is, you know, prickly, but she is so loving and such a good person, and we see her soften towards Anne, but she's never a bad person. And I think that with the things that we know about the witch from this book, I think there needed to be a lot more character development, because like we're seeing Grace come to care about her, and I just didn't. Like, I just could not get past the really awful things that this witch did. Like, basically, I wasn't buying it. I loved Grace, and I loved a lot of the other characters, but one of the important relationships of this book is between her and the witch, who's kind of like a mentor, the closest thing that Grace has had to like a parent or guardian. And I don't know. I think there are probably going to be a lot of adult readers who like how unethical the witch is, you know, who appreciate that the author actually went there. I just think that if that was the route we were going to go with her, I think that the relationship on Grace's part should have been written differently too then. Yeah, but other than that, I thought this was fantastic. I'm really glad I read it, finally. I know it's one that people have been enjoying, and I gave The Grace of Wild Things 4.5 stars. Finally Seen by Kelly Yang. I finally read my first Kelly Yang book. This is a standalone, so it's not connected to her Front Desk series. Her main character is named Lena, and she has been separated from her parents and from her baby sister for a really long time now. Her parents and her younger sister moved to the US, and Lena was left to stay with her grandmother. And Lena loves her grandmother, you know, and she really took care of her, and they're really close, but she's always felt kind of abandoned by the rest of her family, and she keeps thinking that they're going to send for her so that they can all live together in the US, and then finally they do send for her, and Lena is of course heartbroken and guilty for leaving her grandmother, but she's also really excited to finally be with the rest of her family. But then she gets there and she kind of feels like she doesn't even fit in with their family. Like, she hasn't grown up with her parents like her little sister has. She's also struggling in school because some of the kids are really awful and make fun of her accent or the mistakes that she makes in English. Things do start getting better. Lena makes some friends, and she ends up getting a couple of really wonderful teachers. I really liked that we see that in this book. Lena starts getting more confident, and she also discovers graphic novels, so she's reading a lot, and she's like discovering the power of being finally seen, as the title says, and really connecting with the experiences of these main characters and how powerful it is and how important and healing it is. But then one of the parents of one of the kids in the class challenges one of the books they're doing for Read Aloud. And so Lena and her friends have to stand up. So this book tackles a lot of different things, but I feel like it did them really well. It didn't feel like there was too much going on in terms of the themes. Like, it talks about family and the immigrant experience and the things that, you know, people sacrifice for their loved ones, like for their kids especially. I feel like I'm saying this for a lot of the books in this video, but I really did enjoy the friendships and the family relationships and how messy they could be, even when people love each other, and even when it's not that they're like fighting all the time. It's just people have so much like history, you know, and so much going on. My heart just really hurt for Lena, and I could totally understand why she would be feeling all of these confusing feelings, like this mix of guilt and excitement and fear and love, but also feeling like she doesn't even fit in with her parents anymore. Like, it was really, really well done. It talks about family and friendship and found family. I also think one of the things that comes across in this book is how complicated people are. Like, somebody isn't necessarily all good or all bad, and I think that was done very well. I also loved reading the focus on books and the importance of access to books and access to stories, and, you know, the windows and sliding glass doors, how important that is for kids to see themselves, but also to see other kids, people who are not like them. And I was kind of surprised that part of the book didn't start until pretty far in, because I think the synopsis mentions it, and so I was kind of thinking it would be more of a focus throughout the whole book, but I actually feel like that it worked really well the way that Kelly Yang did it, because she's setting up all of these other themes as well, but we also see like the kind of thread of Lena just falling in love with stories, and with how powerful it is to connect to a main character and to see parts of yourself in them. And so we see that happening for quite a while, and then closer to the end of the book is we see somebody trying to challenge that. So I actually thought that was really well done. I liked this a lot. I'm so glad I finally read Kelly Yang, and I gave Finally Seen 4 stars. Then very briefly, Nic Blake by Angie Thomas was the only book on this list that I had already read, because again of various things that I had to edit and cut and change. So there ended up only being one book that I included in the list I was creating that I had already read, and it was this one, and I gave this, I think, a 3.5 stars. I will link the wrap-up where I do a whole review for it, but just to recap here, I liked this, but I didn't love it. I definitely think I'm going to enjoy Angie Thomas's better known books more, you know, like her contemporaries, but this was fine. Like, I enjoyed some of the family stuff. I liked the main character. I thought the audio narrator was great. I'll put her name in captions, and I also really liked some of the thematic choices that Angie Thomas made with this story. But in terms of the actual plot, I found it pretty frustrating, especially some things near the ending, and I just wasn't super pulled in by the world or the overall story. So again, a like but not love. Okay, so a quick recap of the books I talked about in this vlog, or kind of review roundup. I sorted these into 3 different categories. None of these are ranked except for the highest category. So the first one is books that were kind of disappointing or underwhelming in some way. There were a few that I actually disliked, but most of the ones in this category were just kind of fine, or there were things that I liked, but I think that overall it could have been a lot better. The Windeby Puzzle by Lois Lowry, Greenwild by Pari Thompson, Nic Blake and the Remarkables by Angie Thomas, Big Tree by Brian Selznick, Iceberg by Jennifer A. Nielsen, and The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels by Beth Lincoln with illustrations by Claire Powell. Then in the second or middle tier, these are books that I really, really enjoyed. They just didn't quite make the top 5. So these can be 4, 4.5, 5 stars even. And also some of the books in this category are ones that I did really enjoy, but I wasn't as surprised by it, if that makes sense. Or maybe I've read from the author before and I've enjoyed other things that they've written even more, that kind of thing. The Wild Robot series by Peter Brown, Remember Us by Jacqueline Woodson, Finally Seen by Kelly Yang, The Other Woods by Justine Pusella Winans, The One and Only Ruby by Catherine Applegate, The Skull by John Klassen, and then the one that is kind of right on the cusp of, is it in this category or is it in the top favorites? I have The Lost Library by Rebecca Steed and Wendy Mass. And then finally, my top 5, the best of the best, my favorites. And also a lot of these are ones that were not even on my radar until I did this video, so that's extra exciting. But number 5, I have The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett, even though yes, there was that big issue I had. I just overall really enjoyed it. Shira and Esther's Double Dream debut by Anna E. Jordan. The Night Raven by Johan Rundberg, translated by A.A. Prime. This is the first book in the Moonwind mysteries. Simon Sort of Says by Erin Bow. And number 1 is What Happened to Rachel Riley by Claire Swinarski. Really, really love this one, and I don't think I even knew about this book before this project. Like, there's a few in this stack like that. So that's kind of the roundup, that's the breakdown. But for the most part, I didn't have a lot of books that I actually didn't enjoy. There's only one book that got less than 3 stars, and even though I do have a category of underwhelming books, for the most part this was a really, really positive experience, a really great group of books. And again, the fact that so many of the ones that I really loved are ones that I only heard about because of this project, I think that's pretty cool. So let me know if you guys have read any of these, or if you're interested in any of them. Let me know if you've even heard of these, because unfortunately, I think that's going to be even more likely, if Goodreads continues to not do this category, which is infuriating. But yeah, kind of one of the main takeaways, I think, from this video is that now more than ever, we have to put in the effort to find amazing middle grade books. Not because there is not that many of them, or that it's, hard to find them among the ones that aren't so good, but because they just don't get the same kind of attention. And we've seen this with the Goodreads Awards, we've seen this with the Barnes & Noble hardcover policy, just in reading circles and reading society. I do think it is becoming more common for adults to loudly enjoy and promote middle grade literature, but it still isn't nearly as common as it should be. And I think it's incredibly important that we continue to celebrate these amazing stories. So hopefully, if you're already a middle grade lover, I hope you found some things to check out. And if you haven't gotten into middle grade as an adult, I hope you maybe found a couple of books that pique your interest, because I really truly believe that there's middle grade books for everybody, because middle grade isn't a genre. It has nothing to do with the kind of story or the quality of the story, and there's so much amazing storytelling going on from these middle grade authors. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought of the video. Don't forget to check out the playlist that has the rest of the collabs from my wonderful co-hosts. I am very excited to see how everybody did with the categories that actually exist, as well as Ashley and Michelle, who also had their categories cut. But I hope you enjoyed this cobbled together sort of fake Goodreads Awards, and thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!